Hi, Nick here from Conservation Careers, and welcome to the podcast. Now, why do so many people get into conservation because of a love of animals, only to discover it's all about people? And why, if you're interested in working in conservation as a social scientist particularly, should you focus on improving your softer skills, especially if you want to get ahead in your career? Now, we discuss these questions and many more with today's guest, Dr. Laura Thomas Walters. Now, Laura is the Deputy Director of Experimental Research for the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. She describes herself as an environmental social scientist with a focus on behaviour change, who works closely with governments and NGOs to enact change through research. Now, in this episode, we delve into the fascinating world of conservation science and climate change communication. Laura shares her journey into conservation, driven by a passion for big, cuddly animals, and how it evolved into a focus on behaviour change and climate activism. We also explore the multifaceted nature of Laura's research, from demand reduction in the wildlife trade to linking extreme weather events with climate change. We also discuss the importance of cultural awareness, interdisciplinary collaboration, and the challenges of transitioning between academia and government work. Finally, Laura provides valuable insights into the softer skills needed for conservation social scientists and offers advice for aspiring conservationists like you on how to navigate the complexities of this field. It's a social sciencing, climate communicating, behaviour changing pod chat. Enjoy.
So I'm Laura Thomas Walters. I've got two job titles. I've got the really long wordy one, which is Deputy Director of the Experiments Team at the Yale Program for Climate Change Communication at Yale University, or the easier is just Research Scientist.
Right, yeah. And well done remembering that as well. So that is a long job title, yeah. Maybe we can start, Laura. We're just talking about you and your work. Actually, it's quite interesting, like the title that you have and the work that you're in. Just give us a bit of an overview about what your work is in terms of being a research scientist. Yeah, just answer that how you wish. Like, how do you describe it to people, I don't know, at a party or someone that's never met you before?
So I usually tell people I'm a behaviour change specialist. So I try and focus on how can we get people to change their behaviours in ways that are better for the environment. And this encompasses like a huge range of different topics. So I've worked on things like demand reduction. How can we get people to stop buying things like rhino horn or elephant ivory in the wildlife trade? To things like climate activism, how to get more people to be climate activists to try and change government policy. Or right now, a big focus with my current job role is how do we communicate the links between extreme weather and climate change? How do you get people to understand that the reason thousands of people are dying in like horrific heat waves or flooding or whatever is because climate change is making all that much more likely. So I'd say my current job is pretty much my dream job, and I feel super lucky to have it. I do just research. I don't have to do teaching or anything like that.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Yeah. Break it down for us if you could a little bit. So, how do you take one of those really big questions like reducing demand in the ivory trade or linking natural disasters to climate change events as you're doing now? How do you take that big question and turn that into a research topic with aims and goals and steps and results and outcomes? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so I find particularly with new students, that's always the most difficult thing. Like, people have like great big ideas, but how do you change that into like a discrete project that like you can actually accomplish is probably like the hardest bit of it. And particularly if you're someone like me who's got lots of different interests and wants to try out different methods and things like that. So, for example, during my PhD, which was on the wildlife trade stuff I mentioned, I did some really different projects. So I did one thing that was trying to evaluate how successful intervention had been in Sao Tome, which is this country in West Africa. So a local organization had done this really awesome campaign to try and reduce demand for sea turtle meat and eggs. And it was really well designed, it was excellent. And I evaluated, did it have an impact or not? And that was using like quantitative surveys. So we surveyed people before and after and in control areas as well. But then another study we did was looking at, so Japan used to be one of the big destinations for ivory, like in the 80s, and then demand has really gone down. So we wanted to understand why. But this time we couldn't do like quantitative surveys and stuff because we don't have data from like the 70s and 80s to understand what's changed. So we had to use a qualitative theory-based impact.
Yeah, sorry, Laura, we just lost you there for a second. We lost maybe 5 seconds or so. So you talked about how in Japan you had to use qualitative methods.
Yes, because we didn't have like any baseline data and it was a really complicated system what happened. So we did things like we interviewed key stakeholders, a diverse range of them, and the results were really interesting and it was a really enjoyable, very different process as well. Or a third project was trying to create a framework for motivations for demand. So, what are the reasons why different people all over the world interested in very different animal projects? Why do they do it? And we've brought together like lots of different experts there to try and create a global framework to understand this to be used in future projects. So you can see, although we had like one overarching question, how do we reduce demand? Ended up focusing on different areas of the world and using very different methods to do that.
Yeah, really interesting. What are the different kind of methodologies or skill sets that I hear the word multidisciplinary a lot, and this to me applies to what you're talking about here, in terms of working with research scientists on the ground, doing more qualitative kind of like questionnaire type surveys, convening people together from lots of different backgrounds. Like what disciplines, do you sort of weave into your work, or who do you work with when you're answering these sorts of questions? Because it feels like we need more and more different types of skill sets. I wonder if you can just give an idea of the types of people that we need involved in these sorts of studies.
Yeah, so I've worked with, in different studies, lots of different, so I've worked with quite a few economists, lots of psychologists, some political scientists, even ecologists, even a neuroscientist at one point. So yeah, very multidisciplinary. It's I don't know, in conservation, it's both a strength and a weakness. So on the one hand, I feel like we're really good at just taking tools from a really big toolbox, basically. We're really good at just using whatever method or approach or framework or whatever is going to work for the situation. But also because of that, I guess it feels like we don't get as in-depth training in a specific area compared to someone who's like just in political science or whatever, So yeah, both a strength and weakness.
It's like the jack of all trades, master of none. So
yeah,
trying to draw in the skills as needed, dependent upon, I guess, the research and the topic. Yeah.
So I spoke about this to someone before. Because one of the advice you get if you do a PhD is like to become like the person for a specific thing. So you want to be the pangolin guy, or you want to be the systematic review guy, or whatever. You want to become like the go-to person for something really specific.
Yep.
And that's not me at all, because I focus on lots of different areas and things. And I was wondering whether that was a problem or not. What they said to me was, if they were heavily involved in a project and they needed to bring someone in with a very specific skill set to take over one part of it, that wouldn't necessarily be me. But if they had a problem and they wanted to try and figure out how to answer it, I'd be the type of person they would call on, because I've got expertise in a lot of different areas. I'm not constrained to like one specific, well, I can only do this. I can only do messaging experiment and nothing else. And so if it's not a messaging experiment, I can't help. If you've got a question, it's good to be able to draw on a lot of different tools. And I think that also represents conservation as a whole.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. So your skill set is understanding the various disciplines out there and how and when to kind of pull which tool out of the box, if I'm going to sort of mix my metaphors, if you like. You've got a broader understanding about what methods to use when and who to work with when.
Yeah. Although I'd say definitely at the moment, a large amount of what I do is messaging experiments. So yeah, lots of messaging experiments.
So that circles back then to about behavior change and how do we change people's behaviors. And yeah, what are you learning about that? I mean, a kind of recurring theme we have on the podcast is conservationists largely know what the problems are. We've got quite a lot of solutions kind of ready to go and great examples, like you say, in Sao Tome, where, sea turtles were being protected and so forth. Like on the ground, there's a lot of understanding. We're quite good at sort of preaching to the converted, like we're good at talking to ourselves, but we're not so good at bringing people from outside the movement in, and people who don't care about it or don't understand it or don't believe in it. Like that's the bit where it feels like you're reaching out into and trying to kind of get some change in those aspects. What are you learning through research about how to convert and change people's behavior?
So I mean, a couple of things. One, it really depends on the audience that you're looking at. So for example, the current messaging experiments around climate change and extreme weather we're doing in the UK, US, and India. And India is a really interesting case study because on the face of it, when we do like a pre-survey and a post-survey after the interventions, and if you just ask people, a lot of people aren't familiar with global warming or climate change. They might never even have heard of it. They don't know what it is. So it looks like you've got a really big knowledge gap there. However, once you tell them what it is and then do the messaging treatment and explain that it's causing deaths because it's affecting flooding and heat waves in India, stuff like that, then the knowledge, the level of knowledge and belief and attitudes greatly improve really quickly. There's much less of the sort of like polarization that we've seen in other countries necessarily. So you could then focus straight on going to like trying to change behaviors or government support or whatever. Whereas in other countries, people are already familiar with the concept of climate change and global warming and stuff like that. They have the baseline knowledge, but not always the right attitudes towards it. And I think, generally speaking, being able to tailor your message to your audience and understand the values of the audience is really, really important. I've seen this in conservation as well. I've seen some amazing demand reduction campaigns from a Western point of view. So ones that I've seen adverts that have made me cry personally, and if I've shown them to students and things like that, they've made students cry and stuff. They're really good, but don't really account for cultural values and beliefs of the actual target audience, and I think are much less successful for the target audience instead of appealing to those values. And some of the research we've done, we've written about how you could use like traditional Chinese philosophy and beliefs to weave into demand reduction campaigns, the values that are held in that culture rather than the Western values. And, a large amount of conservationists are from the West and are doing these campaigns in different countries with different values and attitudes and beliefs, and that can be an issue.
Yeah. Which actually kind of links us quite well to a recent paper and a study that you've published as well, which is a big part of the reason we got you on the podcast. It really kind of stood out to us. You've been looking at, the paper's called Field Bottlenecks and Skill Development, for conservation social sciences. So you've been looking at the kind of the human dimensions of kind of conservation practice and the skills needed by people entering that field, and where the deficits are and how people might kind of fill them. And it links into kind of the softer skills a lot about understanding the human cultural dimensions, like you've been talking about with kind of communications and messaging. Where to start? I guess let's start by talking about, what are the kind of human dimensions of conservation practice? You're already kind of talking into that quite a lot, actually. But yeah, how would you kind of characterize that? Because when people get into conservation, they're often really interested in kind of working with wildlife, and that's where the passions come from. But it often kind of converts across into understanding, right, we need to really work with people on the ground, understand them and work in partnership. So how would you sort of characterize the importance of working with people, communities, however you want to kind of answer that?
And I totally relate. I got into conservation because I like big cuddly animals and I wanted to be able to help big cuddly animals.
Yeah.
And then through my undergrad days and everything, began to realize, oh, okay, so it's the social side of this that is going to have the, that really matters. It's people that we need to be talking to.
Yeah.
But so when we created this big survey that you're talking about, we sort of created a list of 40 odd skills that are useful in conservation social science, and separate them into like the soft skills and technical skills. So soft skills being the ones that you're talking about, this of like the human dimension side of things. And broadly speaking, you could categorize these as like interpersonal and leadership skills. So things like facilitating group meetings and workshops, or people management and conflict resolution. Project management and organization, like funding generation, strategy development, communication and dissemination, writing for a scientific audience or the general public, whatever. As well as a couple of other ones, so like resiliency. And we found, overall, so within the survey, we asked people to say, like, what are the soft skills that are like most needed for like the sector, the conservation social sector? What are the technical skills that are most needed for the sector? And then what skills should early career conservationists and students, what should they prioritize to be effective? And we found soft skills were much more likely to be chosen than technical skills. So, like people really thought that soft skills are the most important and should be prioritized to be effective over technical skills, which isn't, it's something I would agree with personally, but not necessarily that I thought the field as a whole would also say. And I mean, the number one thing that really came out was cultural awareness and the ability to understand the values and perspectives of others, which is exactly, what we've just been talking about. That came out as super, super important.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So when asking professional conservation social scientists what early career social scientists should be developing in themselves, it's not the technical stuff necessarily. Are they actually, does this mean that people are hiring more based on soft skills or technical skills? I mean, does it kind of, does it influence the hiring process and what people are looking for in terms of like criteria on job descriptions? Or is it more like once people are in the industry, the skills that are really valued are the softer ones? Do you see what I'm saying?
So we didn't exactly get that because it was like, what for the future, for like the next 5 years, and so, what's needed and what should people prioritize. But we did ask for the people who had experience of hiring, which was over half the response. We then did ask them, how do you, if there's a close call between different candidates, what do you prioritize? And interpersonal leadership skills is what came out there over like disciplinary skills and knowledge or fit with the team or diversity or anything like that. It was the number one thing that people would prioritize is interpersonal leadership skills.
So interesting, isn't it? So I've got the results in front of me too. So the top soft skills, the top three that you've already mentioned, the top one. So cultural awareness and ability to understand the values and perspective of others, people management, conflict resolution, developing and maintaining intra-organizational networks and working relationships. These are all, as you say, really kind of soft, sort of people-focused skills. And then technical skills, just to kind of list them really quickly, top three: behavioral change expertise, government and policy expertise, general critical thinking and problem solving. And for me, what stands out between the two, like technical skills, are sort of skills that you can learn and develop, you can take courses on, you can read books on. Feel free to disagree, but that's the way I see it. Whereas the softer skills are more skills you sort of learn through sort of human experience and work.
Well, that's the thing. So we also asked, like, what skills do you think are the hardest to train on the job?
Yeah.
And there's a significant overlap in, like, there's a significant correlation between the skills that are seen as like most necessary, but also the ones that are the most difficult to train on the job, particularly in the case of soft skills. So again, cultural awareness, conflict resolution, just emotional intelligence, all these are considered some of the hardest to train on the job.
Yeah.
But they're also the ones that are most necessary and that people think early career conservationists should prioritize.
Yeah. It's hard. It's a chicken and egg situation, isn't it, for people who are kind of job seeking and understanding that these are the kind of things that are really valued, these kind of softer, more kind of transferable skills, but they're also quite hard to acquire and to showcase to employers. Yeah. Do you have any kind of thoughts or advice for people who are listening who understand this, see the value of some of these skills? Like, how can people, for instance, develop a better cultural awareness and ability to understand values and perspective of others? Are there sort of practical things you think people could do to help their employability and influence?
I mean, number one thing is just recognizing the importance of it. Having an open mind and being willing to try and expose yourself to different cultures and people. I mean, again, as we were sort of saying earlier, it's really important in conservation because a lot of the contexts where we work are very diverse and they have lots of different like types of stakeholders. You might have like local people, indigenous communities. You might have like forest managers. You might have government officials, you might have academic researchers at different NGOs, all with different like backgrounds, cultures, training.
Yep.
So you have, it's difficult to try and like negotiate and work between all these different stakeholders to try and increase project success. But at the same time, I think it's good for you as a person outside of conservation as well. It's about developing humility and empathy, which is good for your development as a person and communicating about like empowering and supporting others and helping to just improve your life of working with people generally. We do have within the paper, we do have more specific like recommendations, like resources listed that people might want to turn to. But generally speaking, with the soft skills that we've identified, there is less out there. There's less like, specific courses about how to develop cultural awareness. Our advice is more around things like telling your supervisors you want to work on these skills and, seeing if you can help manage research collaborations or other activities to practice them with supervision or shadowing, things like that. It's definitely easier to give specific advice for the technical skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But putting yourself in situations where you can experience the need for some of these softer skills and develop them on the job, if you like, is one approach to it, like you say, by speaking to supervisors, managers, and trying to get yourself into those positions. Yeah.
But with it seems like there might be some variation in the importance of different skills depending like the career path you want to go to, like if you want to work in academia or government or non-profit. I mean, overall, in all three of those places, again, cultural awareness is still the number one thing, but some of the other skills do differ. So I think, funding, funding, for example, raising funding is important in academia and non-profits, but is much less so in government. Again, behaviour, not a soft skill, but behaviour change expertise, more important in non-profits than in academia or government. So there is some like variation depending on career path.
Yeah, and who the employer is. Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah. Well, we'll drop a link in the podcast notes if people want to go and read the paper and sort of find out more as well, because I think it's some really kind of valuable lessons in there. I'd like to kind of switch gears slightly then and kind of focus back in on your work and your career, Laura, because it's super interesting what you do and what you have been doing as well. Could you just paint it? We've talked a bit about what you do now, what your focus is, but when you look back at your career so far, what have been the key stepping stones? What's your sort of potted career history, things that have really helped to get you to where you currently are? What does that look like?
So I'd say, so I started off doing animal sciencey stuff, interested in conservation. Did my undergrad dissertation on conservation genetics, which was a great experience because it taught me that I do not like lab work. It was a very good experience to confirm, yeah, no, I want to work with people and computers and not things I could possibly contaminate. So I went on to do a master's at UCL in conservation, evolution, and biodiversity. Which was really useful because I was able to do 2 different research projects. Again, there's lots of things I'm interested in, so being able to do 2 different research projects helped me narrow down. That's when I discovered behaviour change was my big focus. I applied for a PhD and funding to do demand reduction in the wildlife trade at the University of Kent. And then postdoc, government work, postdoc, Yale, my permanent job now at Yale. So I spent some time in a couple of postdocs and as well doing working for the government, the civil service a bit. And throughout that, there's also been lots of consulting and working with different NGOs as well.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. So you actually left academia for a little bit and came back in again. You went out into the government, the civil service, and came back to academia. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that change like? Like, what was? How would you characterize the difference between working for civil service, government, and academics? They're quite different employers.
They are. There are lots of differences. I personally hated it. Yes, I think I only lasted about 5 months or something like that before I came running back to academia.
What did you not like?
Well, so I wanted to try government work because I thought, government's got all the money and the power to make change, and that's what I really want, to make change. But unfortunately, the civil service, as it should be, I suppose, is really constrained by what ministers and government officials want. So when I was a senior advisor in the behaviour change unit at DEFRA, which is the UK's environmental government department.
Department for Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs, yeah, for everyone.
Yeah. So I was senior advisor there, doing behaviour change stuff, but we weren't allowed to work on anything that would have a real impact on conservation of the climate. We weren't allowed to work on like diets or flying or anything like that. It was very much, what the civil servants would allow, not civil servants, the senior government officials would allow us to work on, which, wasn't anything impactful. I can't say what I was working on, but it was some very minor stuff. And it's not to blame the civil servant people, lots of them did really care and stuff, but they're just, really constrained by governments. I also found the civil service in the UK is sort of characterised by generalists. They really prize generalists. So lots of people will, to get ahead and get promoted, you kind of need to move between departments a lot, which means that you don't get a deep background knowledge of like environmental issues amongst a lot of people. There's some like specific teams and stuff which are amazing and really good, like forest research, for example, but lots of other teams just didn't have a lot of actual knowledge about conservation issues and things, or scientific methods and stuff, which I found concerning. So as soon as I got the opportunity to leave, to be able to then work on what I think is important and tell the government that, because we also, weren't allowed to publicly speak out about things while we were working for the government. I made that leap back as soon as I could.
And how has that leap back been? How are you finding being back on the other side in academia, where you're less constrained, you can speak more freely, you are more surrounded by specialists?
Great, I love it. I think it was really helpful to see the grass is not green on the other side. Like, for example, I was thought that academia is full of like bureaucracy and meetings and stuff, but I found that the government is way, way worse. I know, shocking, you wouldn't believe it. But I was like, actually, academia is not as bad as I thought. We actually have less meetings and less bureaucracy than I found in government. So put things into perspective. And I really prize both the research freedom and also the I'd say working freedom. In government, I had to do like timesheets and everything like that, and make sure to book days off in advance with permission and things. Whereas in academia, I found people a lot, there's less of that like overt supervision of how I'm spending my time as long as the work gets done well. And I like that personally.
Yeah. Sort of more responsibility on the individual, more trust. Yeah, that
Yeah.
they'll do the job they need to do. Yeah, great. When I think of academia, I think of one of the few places, and perhaps in civil service government too, where they actually is a kind of defined career path, a trajectory that you don't perhaps see in the charity sector and other areas. So academia to me is you do a degree, maybe a master's, then it's a PhD. This is if you're staying within kind of science and research and teaching. And then it's a postdoc, which might be another postdoc, which might be another postdoc, which might then become like more tenure secured position, which obviously you now have. A, if I characterize that right, and B, what type of person does that favor? Like who does well within that environment, and perhaps who doesn't? Like what are the sort of, how do people stay with it? Because it feels like a filter as well, actually, from people I know and see that some people stay in and thrive and other people leave and do something else. So like what is it about the people that stay in and thrive and do well?
I mean, unfortunately, I think it really rewards the people who have maybe more financial independence or less family ties and things like that. Because like you mentioned, particularly now, people generally have to do multiple postdocs, which might last 1 year, might last 2 or 3 years, but almost invariably means moving. So you've got to have the freedom to move between even different cities, even different countries for your next job. And it's really stressful. It's expensive moving all the time. And it's really bloody stressful always having to like think about, as soon as you start one job, you're thinking about like, I need to start applying for funding or looking for my next job and where's it going to be and everything. And so if you're married, so I am married, but I'm very lucky in that my wife is not a career person. So she has just followed me around multiple times. But if she was also in academia or in some other sort of thing, like, I don't know, medicine, whatever, we'd really struggled. And I'm also lucky to be married because she helped financially support me during the end of my PhD, for example. So I don't come from a wealthy family. But yeah, if we had kids and they needed to be in a school system, bringing them out of that would have been terrible. Okay, so obviously COVID was terrible, but I think it did really open people's eyes to what you can do through remote working. And it worked out quite well for me in that my last 3 jobs, I managed to get all remotely, including my current one, which meant I could move back to my hometown and be near like my disabled mother who, wanted me nearby her again, and my nieces and nephews to get to see them grow up. So I'm super happy I managed to get this current job because we'd reached the point where we'd decided during my last postdoc that we weren't going to move again for family reasons for a while, which meant if I was very much stressing that, will I get an academic job at all because I can't move at this point, or will I just have to leave academia and just get any, a different type of job that will allow me to earn money type thing. So I count myself incredibly lucky to have my Yale job, which is permanent, so I don't have to worry anymore, and I can do it remotely and everything. I'm so happy about that. But there was definitely a large period of stress of, is this going to be it for me? I saw great jobs in like Germany and stuff, and I was like, well, at this point in my life, I can't apply for them because I can't uproot my wife again and go to Germany and leave my family. So yeah, this might not be what you wanted to hear, but I'd say people with that sort of freedom is who it prizes, who it rewards.
It's honestly, it's exactly what we want to hear. We're here to kind of share, honest transparency about the stresses and strains and the realities of working lots of different roles. So yeah, perfect. What advice would you give someone who's looking to kind of work in academia and to do well and to work towards tenure track in due course? And like, what are the people who are successful in the field? What are they doing? How are they being successful? Are they going to conferences? Is it about publishing papers? Like, are there any kind of practical? Is it about networking? Like, what stands out for you on reflection of, these are the things that you should focus on if you want to do well?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, rightly or wrongly, as you just mentioned, networking is massive. A lot of the jobs I've had were through networking, not necessarily the proper full-time jobs, but a lot of I've supplemented my income at various points because, again, like I said, moving all the time and stuff like that is really expensive, through doing consultancy projects for NGOs, and almost every single one of those has been through networking. Like almost none of them were like officially advertised at any point. So yeah, and also proactive networking, reaching out. My undergrad dissertation, I only got that opportunity because I started emailing different people around the country asking, do you have an opportunity for an undergrad to work in your lab? Because that's pretty rare and my university didn't do it. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have got a good reference to get onto my master's, for example. There's just lots and lots of things like that. The person who was a co-supervisor of my PhD wasn't at the university, but I liked his work. I reached out to him and he was fantastic, and he's provided tons of opportunities for me at various points in my career, like the different consultancy opportunities, for example. And that was just by reaching out to him and saying, I like your work, would you chat to me, type thing. Lots and lots of opportunities have just come from that sort of cold calling, email. I mean, they're all, it's not like a blanket email where you just insert the name, there's genuine interest in their research and things. But yeah, that's been huge. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to, and this is particularly a gendered thing. So I think there's good research that men will apply for jobs if they meet like half the criteria on it. Women tend not to apply for jobs unless they meet all of the criteria on it. So particularly women, like, don't undersell yourself, and like, don't be afraid to just apply for stuff and reach out and things. So like I said, the last 3 jobs I had were all remote, but none of them were advertised as remote, I think. All of them, I saw the job, was interested, I emailed, and it was just like, I'm not going to move to wherever this is. Can I still apply? And they like thought about it and they agreed to it, and I ended up getting hired for all of them, but none of them were advertised remote. So I think, really, don't be afraid to just apply for things and reach out and see if you can make it work for your situation, even if it doesn't sound perfect or right for you on paper.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. 2 great bits of advice there. Yeah. And yeah, it's interesting, like with the like reaching out during the application process and asking questions about, could we work remotely? And I think that's quite a nice, almost like a tactic almost, because I'm sure you weren't using it like this, but it comes out like this because it kind of puts you on their radar, so that when your application does drop in, they remember Laura Thomas Walters and the conversations you've already had, and it just kind of elevates your focus within the kind of shortlisting, if I can kind of put it that way. So yeah, we would encourage people to reach out early if you do have questions as well, because it can help, but always make sure they're really good questions and couldn't be easily answered online through a bit of research, like use it as a genuine opportunity to connect early. Yeah.
One other small thing is, we recently hired a postdoc within our lab, and this is just a minor thing, but like, really just generally really do demonstrate that you've got specific skills and stuff, really do write down, not just I'm aware of it, but I've done X, Y, Z in this, and therefore I'm very good at it, type thing. For example, we only wanted to hire people who can use R, the computer programming language, because that's the program we all work in. And just we decided to dismiss those of applications because they didn't say whether or not they could use R, which is something we'd mentioned we wanted in the job ad.
Yeah, absolutely. Be specific. Yeah, spell it out. Yeah, show your evidence. Great. Yeah. We're going to wrap up in sort of 10 minutes or so. We've got someone listening in who want to provide opportunity for them to ask questions also. I'm going to ask them some sort of more open, exploratory questions then towards the end. Nice, quick, easy one. Well, it might not be, I don't know. But if we could kind of parachute you to one place on the planet and you could see one species or ecosystem or habitat, whatever you're interested in, like, where would you really love to go, and what would you hope to see?
Oh God, all of them. All of them. I think maybe Madagascar and the lemurs. I love lemurs. I volunteered at like a couple of zoos during my undergrad and stuff, and yeah, I loved working in the lemur enclosure. They're just so cute.
Great, but you've not been to Madagascar yet?
I haven't, no.
On the bucket list, right? Great. We touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. As a movement, conservation, we're doing some incredible work. We're having some really important victories, but yet we still see that we're losing the battle in terms of wildlife, biodiversity, whatever you call it, is in sharp decline globally at alarming rates. What do you think conservationists need to do more of or be better at? Like, what do you see as something that we really need to focus on more to have more impact as a community?
Honestly, I think climate activism, or general environmental activism. I think a lot of the issues, like you said, we're doing fantastic work, particularly with limited funding and resources. But a lot of this change needs to be top down. We need better government policies put in place and funding provisions and everything. Like, we're fighting a raging fire with like a tiny garden hose. And we need the fire service to turn up with their proper hoses. And so I think, and I'm seeing an increasing trend in this of like scientists and conservation things turning more to activism. But I do see that as the features, a really important thing is, putting pressure on governments to actually take the actions that we need to be able to protect the planet properly.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. I love that metaphor as well. Like, yeah, we're trying to put out a raging fire with a garden hose. That does feel like how it is sometimes. Yeah. It makes me reflect also about the different roles, and we touched on this a few times, of the charity sector, of the government, of the private sector as well, of academia, like the various roles. It feels like the charity sector's been banging the drum quite hard and putting pressure, and that's where they come from. And more, it feels like the corporate, the private sector is sort of getting in on that too, because it's coming from their staff, it's coming from their customers, it's coming from voices that are shared, and so there's hope within that, I think, for the future that we might see some change. Yeah, which I guess leads me to another question, like, are you optimistic for the future of the planet? Let's put it that way. Yeah.
I am, but I think that's more a personality trait than based on any specific scientific evidence. I'm just an eternally optimistic person, and I always have faith that things will turn out right in the end.
Yeah.
But that personality trait has to fight very, very hard about all the scientific evidence I read of the current state of the world and everything.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. And the last question, if we could make you like a global leader, a czar for the day, whatever you want to call yourself, and you could enact one law, a single law, a decree, with a view to improving the environment, wildlife, whatever you want to characterize it. Yeah, I'd be really interested. Like, what law would you enact? What would you make happen?
Ooh. I'm not so sure this is the overall most effective law, but it would just be my pet one that I'm really interested in. It would definitely be something to do with red meat consumption. I mean, realistically, more about taxes and nudges and everything like that. But if I'm global czar, I might just ban the farming of red meat entirely.
Yeah. Because of the carbon emissions from meat production, the water use, the ethical.
It's one of the leading drivers of habitat loss. It's just all round bad.
Yeah. Are you a vegetarian?
Vegan.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So as good as you can get in terms of your diet for the environment. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it'd be great if more people are vegan, but just reducing red meat consumption would be a major win for the environment.
Yeah. Great. And a super simple, clear law, actually. Yeah. Really like it. Yeah. Laura, it's been lovely talking to you about your work. Thank you for joining the podcast. And if people want to find out a little bit more about you and your work, perhaps they want to read papers as well, like where should they go? Where should we send them?
I'll give you a link to my website.
Yep. Perfect. And we'll drop that in the show notes. Yeah. Thanks again, Laura.
No problem.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.